Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Her Excellency Roberta Metsola, European Parliament.
Hi everyone, and thank you for the warm welcome. It's great to be back here at the Concordia Summit, as I was last year, but if a week is a long time in politics, a year is really an eternity. We are less than 45 days away from the presidential election here. Last June, the European Parliament held its own election across 27 EU member states. Since then, the 10th legislature has started, and the Parliament is in the process of constituting a new College of European Commissioners, which is the executive arm of the European Union. This is a time for change in Europe, and we are all getting ready to see it through. And this mandate will be defining for trade, for competition, for economic governance, and for security. Now, people will look to us for leadership, for stability, and direction as we seek to exit the era of omnicrises, as we call it. But as we look around the globe, it is clear that many of the challenges that we face remain unchanged. Russia's aggression in Ukraine continues. China has risen with a value set that is different to ours. India is forging a new path forward as an economic powerhouse. Afghanistan is struggling. The situation in Sudan remains alarming. Iran continues to fuel tensions across the region. The conflict in the Middle East risks escalating further, even further reminding us of the fragility of peace and the necessity of liberty. What is true is that the world around us feels more dangerous than before. People are more worried, more skeptical than before. And it is against this background that I'm here to speak to you today. The European Union and the United States are two of the most powerful economic and democratic forces on the planet. Our partnership has stood the test of time, not just because of the strength of our economies, but because we share a belief, a promise, if you will, that whatever the challenge is, it is freedom, prosperity, democracy, human dignity, and security that must be at the basis of how we respond. Our alliance is more than transactional. It is, at its heart, a bond rooted in shared values. For over 2.5 years, Ukraine has demanded our attention, and for good reason. Because we understand that Ukraine's fight is not just for its survival, but for the same values and ideals that bind us together as a global democratic community. And how we respond is the litmus test of our political generation. Now, for me and the European Parliament, the response is clear. We must stand with Ukraine, and will do so for as long as it takes. Now, this is not a case of altruism, nor is it grandstanding. We stand with Ukraine because we stand for a democratic world order. Because we understand that if Putin's 10-day plan to take control of Kiev had succeeded, he would not have stopped there. His aggression would have continued to erode the values and systems we worked so hard for so long to build. We know that the cost of inaction would be far higher. And we should not accept this, and we have to be able to say it. Not just say it, but back it up decisively. It is true that perhaps we did allow ourselves to be lulled into a false sense of security, and that we thought that there were lines on the map that armies would no longer cross. Now, there are lines in the sand that we cannot cross. And while we will always push forward peace, it must be a just one, with dignity and freedom. We cannot look away from Ukraine, and we must simultaneously do what we can to de-escalate tension in the Middle East and find a sustainable peace in the region, a way forward that breaks the violent cycle of history. We can only do that, or indeed address any of these challenges, if we remain aligned, together. It must be the same philosophy behind our approach to other issues, perhaps less immediate, but those that will shape the future in much the same way and cannot be ignored. Central to this is how we interact with China. In Europe, we have a strategy of de-risking rather than decoupling from China. We will cooperate where possible, compete where needed, and challenge where necessary. For us, it is a question of ensuring that our partnerships align themselves with our principles and our ideals. Now, China is a key player globally, an economic giant that is critical for the global economy, for raw materials, for trade, for labor, for expertise, for import and export. And the challenge is to ensure level playing fields and that we all play by the rules. The current imbalance must be addressed, and the best way to do that remains together. There are very real, very pragmatic reasons to reinforce the EU and US relationship. Isolationism, over-protectionism, and over-regulation cannot work in this world that we live in. We must work to build each other up rather than compete in races to the bottom. And now is the time, perhaps more than ever before, to renew our transatlantic relationship, to reinforce our alliance of global democracies on the world stage. Distinct but together is the only way forward. We are perhaps facing what Ian Bremmer called a geopolitical recession, a shift in the old world order, a change in geopolitical power. And we have a tendency to focus on the rise of newer powers like China in order to explain the shifts. What we do not do enough, in my view, is take stock of what is declining in the old world order, or to be more specific about what has changed and how we can fix it. With a rise in extremists and populists and an ever-increasing fragmentation in politics and in communities, our democratic institutions are increasingly threatened and coming under huge pressure. And once strong governments, institutions, and parliaments are delegitimized by people turning their backs on them, weak institutions are ill-equipped to provide our economies with the robust legal framework that they need to adapt to new geopolitical realities. So we need to relearn how to compromise without compromising on our values. And that is the basis of what the European Parliament does. Too often we are told that politics is a zero-sum game, that it is a choice between growth for our industries or degrowth for our environment, regulation for safety or deregulation for innovation. But that is not true. We can harness all the benefits of digitalization and artificial intelligence while ensuring our people are safe online and protecting freedom of speech. We can manage our borders without losing our compassion. We can adopt policies that are ambitious enough to address climate change and lower energy prices while still ensuring that crucial decarbonization policies work for our industries, our families, and our farmers. We can reindustrialize and grow our economies without leaving anyone behind. We've done it before. We can do it again, better, faster. And it is why we need politics rooted in values where pragmatism and principle go hand in hand. It is a belief that it is as much at the core of the story of Europe as it is central to the American dream. And the more fractured our societies may seem, the greater the schism between the haves and the have-nots, the greater the need presents for us to reaffirm that our way works, that we can offer solutions and hope even to those who feel squeezed. Now, in the coming term, the European Union's top priority will be that of reinvigorating our industries by fostering economic growth, competitiveness, entrepreneurship, and creating quality jobs that show people that democracy means tangible solutions. This means, practically speaking, that we will need to boost productivity, innovation, and speed up investments in clean tech, pharma, transport, microchips, sectors that will define our future. It means we must be ready for public funding to match private ambition. It also means reducing red tape for companies that operate in Europe, as well as eliminating silos that have for so long held us back by completing our banking and capital markets union, offering clear frameworks and ultimately predictability. My point is that there is both the necessity and the interest for us to work together, and the European Union understands this. It is why we appeal for more free trade and less barriers, why we look at trade as a source of mutual improvement, why it is central to supporting the social structure that characterizes so much of European public investment. And we must do this while we also find a balance through reclaiming a strong political center. Not the mushy middle between left and right, as Tony Blair recently put it, but the space where forces converge, the only place where solutions can be found. In Europe, it was precisely this center that managed on issues so politically difficult as migration, as defense, as funding for Ukraine, as economic governance. It was not easy. We have 27 different member states with 27 different starting points. In the European Parliament, we have 720 members who belong to groups across the political spectrum. I can tell you, it often feels impossible. But we find ways, we build majorities, not by entrenchment, not by preaching in abstract terms, but by seeking common ground, through compromise. Hard, tough, definitely not mushy compromise. And that is what I mean by reclaiming the political center. Now, critics may call this the politics of the past. I call it the politics of the future. Because I believe that the only way to defeat populism, to push back against extremism from taking hold so quickly, it is not by claiming moral superiority or ignoring it. It is with solutions, real, practical solutions to the challenges that people face. If we are unable, that is when we will see more of a retreat towards the political fringes. And here, as revolutionizing social media has been, it too often pours fuel on the flames. The challenges of propaganda and disinformation are age-old, but technological advances have given them a reach that is unprecedented. Our tools, built for good, have also become an outlet for absolutism, for those even malign state actors who sow mistrust, false expectations, cause confusion, incite violence. They try to amplify and distort the legitimate fears and concerns of people and therefore push people away. Now, our job collectively is to bring them back to the center, because that is how we make change, how we move societies and communities forward, how we are able to beat the extremes. and how we move ultimately from crisis management to long-term growth. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks put it so eloquently when he wrote, and I quote, "We're living in tough times globally, and will need all the inner strength that we have to survive the turbulence, learn from the mistakes of the past, and begin again. The real test of a society is not the absence of crises, but whether we come out of them cynical and disillusioned or strengthened by our rededication to high ideals. That is what I want to see from a rededicated, stronger transatlantic relationship, why I believe politics is the solution, and we must keep pushing for change." Thank you.
Presidenta Metsola, we are so glad and honored to have you here in the Concordia Annual Summit for the second year in a row.
Sure, thank you for having me.
As a European, I just wanted to thank you because of you inspiring us and you giving us hope in European institutions. It's your second term as a president, by the way, the youngest president in history. That's impressive.
Not so young anymore, huh? It just means that everybody who came before me was much older. Not so young anymore, to be clear.
So, listening to your words about politics being the answer to make Europe, and even the world, a better place, I would like to explore with you some of this more in detail. So, you have committed to maintain strong leadership and have made reforming the parliament a key pillar of your mandate as president. Could you elaborate on what you visualize to be a reformed parliament?
So first of all, thanks for the opportunity. And if there's one thing I've learned in all my years, I've been active in politics for a very long time, is that if we don't change, we die. Every institution will resist change. People who have been around for a long time love the status quo. But I found myself with an institution that had not changed for a long time, where its members, myself included, had started to perhaps take voters for granted, thinking no matter which election comes round, people will vote anyway. Or even worse, the people we want to vote for us will vote anyway, and the rest are people we will not look for. Young people, minorities, people feeling isolated, people far away from cities, people thinking that the language we speak is too difficult, people who thought we would never deal with climate, with economy, with protection of smaller industries, smaller companies, families. I mentioned farmers in my speech because there was one sector, which was the agricultural sector, that was really subject to an onslaught of propaganda from the extremes in order for them to move away from the center. So I took that as a philosophy with me. It's how I run the institution together with my colleagues. And I push those colleagues quite a lot in order for us to be effective, more efficient, and essentially adapt to what the citizens want from us.
Even those that don't want change, they're going to accept it, right?
Well, you have majorities. I just need to build them. And I can always find good ones that will help me build them. And I can convince. I mean, I come from one of the smaller, I won't say the smallest, I come from one of the smaller member states in the European Union. And if there's one thing I learned, is that it's not about your political position, it's not where you come from, but whether you can sit around a table and convince. And that is, whether it is something small, or whether it is something big, you build majorities just by starting with one person.
Exactly. So you have been just re-elected, as you said, President, and one of your final commitments in the Parliament's last mandate was the Asylum and Migration Pact. I know that is a
big word.
Big topic. But do you see work on migration and delivering a common European answer extending into the new legislation?
Yeah, this has been a question that has been put to me for the past couple of days as I've been here in New York. Is that the solution? I'm not a big believer in over-regulation. And I'm also the first one to say that we should pause when I see that legislation is leaving our citizens behind. Perhaps this is not in tandem with me being a lawyer and a legislator, but it's also an understanding of where we've actually gone too far, too fast. But in the area of migration, in order for us to take away what I would call the emotion of the subject, the hijacking of the subject in all electoral campaigns, with the rise, perhaps inevitably, of political parties or movements in every single member state based on either open the European Union completely up or close it completely down, was legislation. In other words, getting 27 member states, all the candidates that were running for the European Parliament, could at least have a legislative package which still needs to be put into force, but that would mean that citizens can say that on a European level, we found a solution. The instinct, and we saw this during the pandemic, the instinct of governments, or anyone really, was to close borders as soon as the pandemic hit, as though we thought that the virus would stop at a police control check. But what that meant is that what we had worked for decades, that was the first thing I thought, what we had worked on for decades to open up, to give our citizens freedom of movement, to give a sense that when you come to the European Union, you can move, you can work, you can travel, you can study, you can have a better life. That disappeared in 1 week, I would say. And what that led to is a taking over by extremist rhetoric into thinking that those walls, those borders, meant a return, if you want, a misplaced nostalgia for a Europe that never was. So for my generation, or people a little bit older than us, that nostalgia was something that they would not remember, but they thought did. And we needed to counter that. How do we counter that narrative? By legislation, by explaining it, and by giving people a sense of, if I'm going to go vote for the European Parliament, if I'm going to go vote for my member of the European Parliament, that election, that vote is going to make a difference to my life. If I vote for somebody on the extreme part of the spectrum, that vote is for destruction rather than for construction, for building majorities. If I don't vote, I might not like what I see. And any decision that is taken, I have not influenced. So the Migration Pact came as a result of years of failure, years of 27, 28 with the United Kingdom of countries going alone, and a realization that people were not finding the solutions and that perhaps Europe could.
As you said, we need to find the balance between the being open and the compassion for other human beings and regulate that the human rights for these people. That's the key. And talking about these streams, let's say, let me ask you something a little bit more sensitive. Are you concerned with the rise and popularity of far-right parties in the European Parliament following the recent elections?
So one of the nicest memories I've had, or at least experiences I've had this year, as difficult as it was to address the media as soon as all the polling booths across the European Union had closed, because we all vote on the same couple of days. You wait until Sunday night, polls close, and you get the exit polls. And the collective sigh of relief that I could present to over 1,000 journalists that were sitting in the hemicycle, as we call it, which is where our members sit, when I told them the center has held. We had combated not only months long of electoral interference in some countries more than others. I speak specifically on a number of Central and Eastern European countries where elections are openly or not so openly through proxies interfered with online. This is a hatred rhetoric, an intolerant rhetoric that has captured social media feeds. And I remember being particularly concerned myself as my eldest son was a first-time voter in this election. And his idea of getting news is very different to mine. And I was really wondering what would, if he were not my son, poor him, influence the way he voted. Wow. And I said, if I'm worried about my son, imagine how I should be worried about everybody else's. And there we managed through, first of all, going after the young voters, encouraging them to vote. We have 4 countries in the European Union, one of them is mine, where people vote at 16. How do we go to schools? How do we encourage them to vote for what will make a difference in their life? Because what I realized is that people had, year after year, realized, okay, the European Parliament is in Brussels, MEPs are far away, they speak really difficult language, and either they didn't vote, or they voted for those movements who would tell them, we're going to go to Brussels to destroy the European Union. There still are quite a lot of them, so of course I am concerned, but that also places a responsibility on myself, and I put myself in the center together with the majority of the Parliament in being more responsible than ever before to build majorities in order for us in 2029, which is when the next election will be held, that we can try to address the challenges and the concerns of those citizens in making them perhaps not vote for me or my colleagues, but for an alternative that is not extremist and intolerant at its very basis.
So I'm afraid that our time is up. Even chatting with you, having this conversation is such a pleasure. I could go on. Thank you so much. We hope to have you again.
See you next year.
And grazie. Thank you.
Grazie. Thank you.